Picture this. It's Saturday night.
Oh, the classic Saturday night panic.
Right. You're sitting in your study, just staring at the Greek text of 1 John.
Yeah.
The church is completely empty. It's totally quiet, but your desk is just absolute chaos.
Highlighters everywhere, I imagine.
Oh, all the highlighters. And the commentaries are stacked up to the ceiling. You know, Bruce, Marshall, Yarbrough, all the heavy hitters are just looming over you.
Sounds incredibly stressful.
It is. And you are deep in the weeds. You have successfully parsed every single aorist participle in the pericope.
Wow. Good for you.
Right. You know the lexical root of every single noun. You've even spent, like, the last hour doing this incredibly granular word study on 3 different Greek prepositions.
Naturally.
So you know exactly what the text says. But, and here is the worst part, you are completely stuck.
Paralyzed.
Totally paralyzed.
Yeah.
You look at a whole paragraph trying to figure out how in the world you're going to preach it tomorrow morning, and you have absolutely no idea what the overarching argument actually is.
Because you're hyper-focused on just one parsed verb.
Exactly. You are quite literally missing the forest for the lexical trees.
Yeah, that is the classic exegetical dead end right there.
It really is.
And frankly, it's an occupational hazard for anyone who has been through, traditional seminary training.
Oh, 100%.
We are taught to dissect the text so thoroughly, to just isolate the verbs and the nouns so aggressively that the text essentially dies on the operating table.
That's a great way to put it.
We end up with a pile of grammatical organs, but no living, breathing body.
Right. And there's a psychological reason we do this, I think.
Oh, definitely.
When we talk about diagnostic work, whether it's medicine or language,
Yeah.
we crave precision.
We want it to be math.
Yes.
Yeah.
We want it to be like engineering. You break your arm, the x-ray shows that jagged white line, and the doctor just points to the screen and says, there it is, broken.
Clean and binary.
Exactly. We want our Greek exegesis to be that clean. We want to point to a pluperfect verb and say, aha, there it is. That's the secret meaning of the text.
But it never works that way.
Never. Because then you step back, you look at your sermon outline, and you realize that identifying the verb tense didn't actually tell you what the author is trying to do to the audience.
Right.
Suddenly, that grammatical x-ray machine feels completely inadequate.
Because it is inadequate. I mean, if you're only looking at the grammar, the parsing, the declensions, the morphology, you're looking at a skeleton.
Just bones.
Just
Yeah.
bones. You aren't seeing the living, breathing organism. You aren't seeing the flesh, the movement, the real intention behind the words, which is basically the definition of diagnostic muddy waters when it comes to biblical exegesis. And that's exactly why we are doing this specific deep dive today.
I am so excited for this one.
Me too. We are going to synthesize 2 incredibly powerful frameworks to get you out of those weeds.
So what are we looking at?
Well, on one side, we have systemic functional linguistics. Specifically, we're looking at Chapter 7 of M.A.K. Halliday and Ruqayyah Hasan's groundbreaking 1976 work.
Cohesion in English.
Exactly. That and their broader theories on the meaning of cohesion. And then on the other side, we have the practical discourse analysis of the Greek New Testament.
Focusing specifically on Johannine literature, right?
You got it.
And for those of you who might not be familiar with Halliday, he is essentially the godfather of looking at language not as this set of rigid, abstract rules, but as a social resource.
A massive paradigm shift.
Huge.
Yeah.
Because before Halliday, the linguistic world was totally dominated by generative grammar.
Right, focusing on the theoretical rules of how a sentence is formed in a vacuum.
Yeah, like math equations. But Halliday came along and said, no, language actually happens in a context. People use language to do things.
To perform actions.
Exactly.
Yeah.
So our mission for you in this deep dive is a big one. We are moving way past mere word-level parsing.
We want to show you how to see the architecture of language.
Yes. We're going to explore how these abstract linguistic frameworks completely change how you read, interpret, and ultimately preach the biblical text.
We're getting out of the grammatical weeds and looking at the structural grid.
But to start us off, I think we have to smash a massive, deeply ingrained assumption.
We have to destroy the supersentence myth.
Yes. If you don't grasp this, nothing else in systemic functional linguistics will make any sense at all.
It really is the foundational concept, and it requires a complete paradigm shift for anyone trained in traditional grammar.
So break it down for us. What is the traditional view?
Okay, traditionally, we are taught to think of language in terms of a rank scale.
Like Russian nesting dolls.
Exactly like Russian nesting dolls. Letters make morphemes. Morphemes make words. Words make phrases. Phrases make clauses. And clauses make sentences.
Makes logical sense so far.
Right. But because of that training, we subconsciously assume that a text, whether that's a paragraph, a chapter, or a whole biblical book, is just the next step up the ladder.
We assume a text is just a really big sentence.
A super sentence.
We treat paragraphs like a string of words piled on top of each other, like linguistic Lego bricks. Just snap another sentence on and the structure gets taller.
But Halliday and Hasan argue forcefully that this is entirely wrong.
The latter stops, doesn't it?
The structural hierarchy absolutely stops at the sentence. A text is not a grammatical unit.
Wow.
It does not consist of sentences in the way that a sentence consists of clauses. Let me just repeat that because it's crucial for you to hear. A text is not a grammatical unit.
So what is it then?
Rather, a text is a semantic unit. It is a unit of meaning in context.
I think this is where traditional grammarians start to sweat a little bit.
Oh, they panic.
Because if a text isn't bound by the rules of grammar, what is governing it? If I'm looking at a whole chapter of 1 John, and it's not just one giant grammatical structure, how does this semantic unit actually work?
Think of it this way. A text is realized through sentences, but its unity is governed by its semantic relationship to its environment.
Okay, unpacking that a bit.
When you listen to someone speak, or when you read a text, the lexicogrammar, which is just the actual vocabulary and grammatical structures, is actually full of holes.
Full of holes.
Yeah. Halliday describes it as a picture that is complete but out of focus. The outlines are blurred, the details are imperceptible.
Oh, I see.
The lexicogrammar provides a symbolic representation of the author's intent, but on its own, if you just isolate it verse by isolated verse, it is blurry.
I've always thought of it like looking at a sheet of really complex orchestral music.
That's a great analogy.
If you were doing pure grammatical parsing, it's like focusing entirely on a single printed note. You put all your energy into identifying that one C sharp.
Right, you know exactly what that note is.
But if you just look at that C sharp, it's just a black dot on a page. It tells you absolutely nothing about the song itself.
Nothing at all.
The actual texture of the piece, the way that C sharp relates to the chord progression beneath it, the tempo, the overarching movement from the strings to the brass, that is the melody.
Exactly. And cohesion is the lens that brings the blurred picture into focus. It's the melody.
But let me push back on this just for a second, because I know what you were thinking as you listened to this.
Go for it.
If a text isn't bound by rigid objective grammar, what actually holds it together? Is it just like vibes?
Vibes.
Yeah. Were we just subjectively feeling our way through a paragraph and deciding it sort of feels cohesive?
That is a great question, and the answer is no. It's definitely not just vibes.
Okay, good. That's a relief.
In SFL, this semantic unity is something highly measurable and objective. It is called texture.
Texture.
Texture is the defining property of being a text. It is what distinguishes a unified passage of language from just a random inventory of totally unrelated sentences pulled from a hat.
Why? So how do you measure it?
Texture is created when cohesive ties express continuity across sentence boundaries. They allow sentences to cohere with one another rather than existing as these isolated floating propositions.
Okay, so texture is measurable. And it's not an all or nothing thing, right? It's not just, this has texture or this doesn't.
Precisely. It exists on a spectrum. You have what linguists call texture density.
So tight versus loose.
Yeah. A text can have tight texture, which means it has dense, overlapping clusters of cohesive ties. This signals to the reader that the meanings of the parts are strongly interdependent. You literally cannot understand sentence B without sentence A.
Got it. And the flip side.
Conversely, a text can have loose texture with very few ties. This often signals a transition between different stages of a narrative, a shift in an argument, or a move to a new topic entirely.
Which brings up a fascinating point about how biblical authors, and just really good writers in general, actually construct their arguments.
Oh, it's brilliant when you see it.
Halliday talks about the periodic rhythm of texture. A sophisticated writer will play this semantic rhythm, the alternating tight and loose texture off, against the physical visual breaks of paragraphs. They might extend a really dense, tight, cohesive tie right across a paragraph boundary while leaving the internal texture of the paragraph itself relatively loose.
It's totally deliberate.
I like to think of it as rhetorical contrapuntal music. You have the visual rhythm of the eye, which is the paragraph breaks, playing against the semantic rhythm of the mind.
And if we apply this directly to biblical exegesis, This completely invalidates how many pastors prep their sermons.
Oh man, don't I know it?
This is exactly why you cannot just preach a verse in isolation, or even a paragraph defined by the formatting of your modern English translation.
Yeah, those little paragraph headings in your ESV or NIV, they are editorial additions.
They are not inspired text. The actual semantic boundaries, the true texture of the argument, might completely cross those artificial paragraph lines.
So if you let the publisher's formatting dictate your exegesis rather than the semantic texture, you're going to chop the author's argument in half.
You'll butcher it. It's a phenomenal warning.
So, if texture is what brings a text into focus and establishes its boundaries, how do biblical authors manipulate that focus right out of the gate?
How do they hook you?
Yeah, how do they grab the reader? Because if I'm reading an epistle, the author isn't physically in the room with me. They have to pull me into their world immediately.
Right.
And here is where SFL introduces a concept that absolutely blew my mind when I first encountered it: imaginary texture.
Oh, imaginary texture is one of the most brilliant strategic devices in literature.
It's so cool.
Essentially, writers can initiate a text with an unresolved presupposition. They use a cohesive tie, like a pronoun or a demonstrative, but they don't provide an antecedent in the immediate text.
So they point to something that isn't there.
Exactly. They point to something that hasn't been established yet.
Just to make sure we're all on the same page with the linguistic jargon here. Anaphora points backward to something already said, and cataphora points forward to something about to be said.
Right.
So with imaginary texture, they use a pointing word, but there's nothing there to point to. The referent is just missing.
To illustrate this, Halliday and Hasan use the opening of Lewis Carroll's Through the Looking Glass. It's the perfect example.
Okay, lay it on us.
The very first sentence of the book is this: "The white kitten had nothing to do with it."
It. What is it?
Exactly. The narrative begins as if you, the reader, are already right in the middle of a conversation.
Like you just walked into a room?
Yeah. It presupposes a great deal of history that has supposedly gone before, but nothing has actually gone before. It's the first page of the book.
So your interest is immediately engaged.
Because your brain, which is wired for language processing, inevitably starts searching for an interpretation of the word it. Carroll forces you to keep reading.
Does he ever resolve it?
He finally resolves it cataphorically 2 paragraphs later. We eventually find out it refers to unwinding a ball of wool.
They also give that great example of a radio comedian in the source material.
Oh, yeah, I love that one.
Imagine comedian walks out on stage, grabs the mic, and the very first thing he says is, "So we pushed him under the other one."
And it's hilarious.
It is, because it implies this shared chaotic history between the comedian and the audience that doesn't actually exist. It creates this immediate insider effect.
You feel like you are on the inside of an inside joke with the speaker, even though you literally just sat down.
Which brings us perfectly to the Greek New Testament application. The author of 1 John is an absolute master of imaginary texture.
He really is. He uses this exact same psychological and linguistic mechanism to build his community.
Let's look at 1 John 1.13.
Oh, this is the perfect text for this.
Let's read the Greek, because it really highlights just how jarring this is. John opens the epistle with a relative pronoun, ho, spelled omicron with a rough breathing mark, pronounced simply ho.
And it translates to that which.
Right, homen paterges, that which was from the beginning.
Now, putting on your exegetical hat for a second, what stands out to you grammatically about that opening?
There is no explicit head noun. He doesn't start by saying the gospel was from the beginning or Jesus was from the beginning. He just starts with a dangling pronoun, that which. Oh.
And he doesn't just do it once.
No, he creates this massive, unresolved cataphoric string that spans multiple verses.
It's exhausting in Greek.
Let me read the English just to show it. That which was from the beginning, which we have heard, which we have seen with our eyes, which we looked upon and have touched with our hands.
The reader is just thrust directly into an ongoing, highly charged theological environment.
Your brain is desperately tracking forward, trying to resolve this string of ho, 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 until finally, right at the end of verse 1, you hit the resolution.
The payoff.
Tu logutases, pronounced. Tu eloishgutais, zo ace, the word of life.
And we have to ask why John does this. I mean, the pastoral and theological application of this linguistic choice is profound.
It's not just a stylistic quirk.
No, John isn't just delivering data in a dry, systematic theology format. By using imaginary texture, By forcing the audience to supply the shared context and track with him until the resolution, he establishes an immediate, intimate solidarity with the recipient community.
Wow.
He assumes a shared experience of the incarnate Christ. He's essentially saying, you and I, we already know what that which is. We share this.
I want every pastor listening to really think about this for your pulpit ministry this Sunday.
Oh, absolutely.
Yeah.
Preachers can use this exact same linguistic mechanic.
When you step into the pulpit, if you start your sermon with a dry, perfectly complete grammatical proposition like, today I am going to teach you 3 things about the incarnation, you are lecturing.
You are creating distance between you and the pew.
But if you start in media res, if you use an unresolved cohesive tie or drop them right into the middle of a narrative without setting the stage first, you immediately build communal solidarity.
You make the congregation lean in.
Their brains are wired to resolve the tension, so you make them insiders to the text. I actually remember once starting a sermon by simply walking up to the mic and saying, and that is exactly why he had to die.
Oh, that's good.
The entire room went dead silent. Everyone was waiting for me to resolve the that and the he.
Because you force their brains to search for the referent.
John did this 2,000 years ago. And it still works today because it's baked into the cognitive architecture of how human beings process language.
But here's the catch. If John thrusts the reader into this imaginary, unanchored texture to grab their attention, he can't leave them there forever.
Right. If you just keep using unresolved pronouns, your audience will get hopelessly lost.
You have to tether them back to reality. You have to leave breadcrumbs to guide them through the argument.
And he does that through our first major category of cohesive relations, which is referential cohesion.
Right. Relatedness of reference.
Yeah.
This operates at the semantic level of the text, not just the grammatical level.
So it's about co-interpretation.
Exactly. The interpretation of one item absolutely depends on another. You cannot understand word A without looking at word B.
Got it. And in koine, Greek pronounced koine, reference items like personal pronouns, demonstratives, and relative pronouns are the primary breadcrumbs.
They establish this semantic continuity across clause boundaries and even across entire chapters.
Let's look at anaphoric tracking, so pointing backward to establish continuity. Let's look at the Gospel of John, chapter 1.
Perfect. John 1.1, the most famous opening in the New Testament. In the beginning was the Word, and the Word was with God. And arche on ho logos.
Okay, so we established the head noun right there. Ho logos, pronounced ho, L-O-Agigos, the Word.
Now skip down to verse 14. And the Word became flesh and dwelt among us. Look at the second half of that verse. And we have seen his glory, glory as of the only Son from the Father.
His glory.
The Greek word for his there is alteriou, pronounced o to This personal pronoun achieves cohesion by co-reference with the nominal head ho logos, which was established all the way back in John 1.1.
Think about the massive distance there. The pronoun auto tracks all the way back across 14 highly dense theological verses.
It's the primary semantic thread holding the entire prologue of John's Gospel together.
It is the tether. If you lose the thread of hot logos, if you don't trace that reference backward, the whole prologue basically falls apart into disconnected sayings.
Completely.
So that's pointing backward. But what about pointing forward? How does cataphora function as a cohesive tie in Greek?
We see a brilliant example of cataphoric reference back in 1 John, specifically 1 John 1.5.
Okay, let's hear it.
This is the message we have heard from him and proclaim to you, that God is light. The Greek for this is hoto, pronounced H-O-W-T.
Let me give you the Greek for that exact phrase. Kai estin hoto and angelia. And this is the message.
Here, the demonstrative hoto functions as a cataphoric deictic pointer. It does not refer backward to anything previously mentioned in verses 1 through 4.
So its semantic content is completely empty.
It is a vessel waiting to be filled. You literally cannot understand it until you read forward and resolve it with the subordinate hoti clause at the end of the verse.
Hoti, pronounced H-O-H-T.
Right. Hoti ho theos phos estin. Pronounced ho the os phos estienen. That God is light.
And this raises a huge, highly practical red flag for you as you outline your sermons.
A massive red flag.
Think about how often we, as expositors, preach the pointer instead of the resolution.
Oh, all the time.
I actually did this early in my ministry. I took 1 John 1.5, chopped it in half, and preached a whole 40-minute sermon on this is the message we heard.
Oh, no.
Yes. I talked about the nature of apostolic messaging, the importance of listening to the apostles, the transmission of historical truth, and I completely ignored the second half of the verse.
You ignored the resolution.
I ignored that the grammar explicitly demands you move forward to the resolution. God is light. I preached a whole sermon on an empty pointer.
Which is From an SFL perspective, a major exegetical fallacy.
A total failure on my part.
In 1 John, this specific cataphoric construction hoto estin, followed by a hoti or haina clause, is a major structural device. John uses it repeatedly to anchor his foundational propositions.
This is the confidence we have, that he hears us.
Yes, this is love, that we walk in obedience. If you don't understand that hoto is just a cohesive tie demanding co-interpretation with what follows, you will chop the verse up incorrectly.
You have to preach the resolution, because linguistically, the pointer has no independent meaning. It's like pointing at a sign, but refusing to read what the sign actually says.
That's exactly what it is.
Okay, so we've tracked the breadcrumbs of what is explicitly written on the page, the pronouns and the demonstratives. But here's where we take a turn into some of the most profound linguistic theory in SFL.
My favorite part.
Because sometimes the most powerful cohesive ties in a text aren't the words you track. They are the words the author deliberately leaves out.
The power of the unsaid.
Exactly. Let's unpack substitution and ellipsis.
So, while referential cohesion operates at the semantic level of meaning, substitution and ellipsis operate at the lexicogrammatical level.
They are about relatedness of form.
Right. They involve replacing a word, which is substitution, or entirely omitting a structural element of a sentence, which is ellipsis. And they function specifically in environments of contrast.
Contrast is the absolute key to understanding this. Halliday notes that when we speak, we are constantly managing the flow of information.
Managing what the listener knows versus what they don't know.
Yes. There is given information, things the listener already knows from the previous sentence, and new information, the fresh point we are trying to make.
Right.
By replacing or omitting the given information, the speaker can place unmarked tonic focus purely on the new information. It preserves the information focus.
Exactly. Ellipsis is technically defined in SFL as substitution by zero.
Substitution by zero. I love that phrasing.
A structural slot in the sentence, like the subject or the verb, is left completely empty. But it's not an error. The listener's brain automatically fills the empty slot in with the exact wording from the preceding clause.
I want to make sure this is crystal clear, so let me give you my absolute favorite analogy for ellipsis.
Let's hear it.
Imagine you are watching a stage play in a theater. You have a huge ensemble cast on stage. The cast represents all the words in a fully formed, grammatically complete sentence subjects, verbs, direct objects, prepositional phrases.
Okay, I'm picturing it.
Now, if you shine the main stage lights on everyone, you see the whole scene clearly, but no single actor really stands out. Everyone is illuminated equally. That's a normal sentence.
Right.
But ellipsis is like the director deciding to suddenly turn off all the stage lights, plunging the stage into darkness, and hitting just one single actor with a blindingly bright spotlight.
Wow.
By turning off the lights on everything else, zeroing out the given information, the single spotlight makes the remaining subject, the new information, shine with incredible, focused intensity.
That is a phenomenal way to picture it. Let's apply that spotlight to the Greek New Testament.
Yes, let's do it.
The discourse analysis document applies this specifically to the interrogation of John the Baptist in John chapter 1, verses 19 through 21.
A great narrative.
Now, before we look at the text, we need to understand a quick linguistic baseline. Ancient Greek is what linguists call a highly inflected pro-drop language.
Break that down for us. What does pro-drop mean, and how does inflection work here?
So pro-drop means pronoun dropping. In English, if I want to tell you my state of being, I have to say I am. I must include the pronoun I.
Right. If you just walk up to me and say am, I'm going to look at you like you're crazy.
Exactly. It makes no sense. But in Greek, the verb itself changes form. It inflects to indicate who is doing the action. The Greek word for I am is emi, pronounced A-M-E.
So the I is baked right into the morpheme at the end of the word.
Yes. Therefore, you can drop the explicit pronoun. Because of this, structural ellipsis is ubiquitous in Greek. It happens all the time. But John the Evangelist uses it in this specific narrative for maximum deliberate rhetorical emphasis.
So the scene is tense. The Pharisees in Jerusalem have sent priests and Levites to interrogate John the Baptist out in the wilderness. They want to know who he claims to be.
The stakes are high.
Very high. Question 1. Are you Elijah? Let's look at the Greek. Su Elias I, pronounced su I-L-E as a I, subject, which is su for you, complement, which is Elias for Elijah, and verb, which is I for are.
So that's the question, and John's answer 1 is, I am not, uk I me, pronounced uk I am e.
Notice exactly what happened to the structure there. The interrogator's question had a complement, Elijah. John's answer contains only the polar negative uk and the verb I me.
There is an ellipsis of the complement. He completely zeroes out the word Elijah.
He turns the stage light off on the title. The title is given information, and he refuses to even repeat it.
Exactly. But it gets even more intense, and the ellipsis gets even more radical.
Here comes question 2.
Are you the prophet? Referring to the eschatological prophet of Deuteronomy. Ho prophetos esu. Pronounced ho pro fay tes isu. Complement, verb, subject.
And answer 2 is simply no. Just the Greek word o, pronounced oo.
One single syllable. Radical clausal ellipsis.
The entire proposition, I am the prophet, is treated as given information and completely zeroed out. The subject, the verb, the complement, all gone.
The only thing left standing on the stage under the spotlight is the polar negative marker. The new information is just no.
I want you to really think about the theological brilliance of this grammar for a second. The grammar is the theology here.
There really is.
John the Baptist literally uses radical clausal ellipsis to grammatically annihilate these messianic titles from himself.
The Pharisees keep trying to pin these grand eschatological, heavily weighted titles onto him.
And John uses the very structure of his language to subtract himself from the equation. He zeroes himself out. The grammar is the theology of humility.
If you just parse the verbs in your study, you might write in your notes, oh, John answered in the negative, moving on.
Right.
But if you trace the ellipsis, if you understand the SFL concept of zeroing out given information, you can preach a massive sermon on how the Baptist's humility permeated down to the very syntax he chose to speak.
It's a perfect example of why text-in-context discourse analysis is infinitely superior to isolated word parsing. It reveals the rhetorical heartbeat of the narrative.
It really does. But this also provides a perfect pivot for us.
How so?
Because while John the Baptist uses ellipsis to subtract and zero out information, John the Evangelist uses our next core concept, lexical cohesion, to multiply and overwhelm the reader with dense, inescapable thematic clusters.
Lexical cohesion. This is where we finally get into vocabulary.
Yes, but with a twist.
Right. I want to be very clear here.
Yeah.
This is not about doing isolated historical word studies. We aren't looking at the etymology of a word in Homeric Greek.
No, lexical cohesion is about how words bond together within the text itself to create texture.
Halliday and Hasan break this into 2 main categories, reiteration and collocation. Let's start with reiteration.
Reiteration is exactly what it sounds like. It includes direct repetition of the exact same word, the use of synonyms, superordinates like using animal to refer back to dog, and general words.
Now, if you spent any time in Johannine literature, you know his style relies heavily on this. He loves to build these staircase-like patterns of exact lexical repetition.
The famous stepladder in John 1.4-5, it is hypnotizing in Greek.
Let's look at it. In Olchishon, in him was life. Cohesion to Sochjan Anterfen, and the life was the light of men. Kai Tafush and Toskosia Fene, and the light shines in the darkness. Kaya Skosia Otohu Katalaben, and the darkness has not overcome it.
If we visually map the lexical reiteration there, it looks exactly like an interlocking chain. Zuchu to zo, pronounced zo, ICE, life to life, then fush to force, pronounced force, light to light, then Scotia to Scotia, pronounced koti-e, darkness to darkness.
What is psychologically fascinating to me here is the intersentence structure, how he actually arranges the clauses. We touched on given to new information a minute ago. Well, SFL maps this onto the clause as theme and rheme.
This is a crucial concept.
The theme is the starting point of the message, what the clause is about. The rheme is the new information, the destination of the clause.
Notice what John does here. Each sentence picks up the head lexical item from the end of the previous clause, the new information, the rheme, and fronts it to the beginning of the next clause, making it the given starting point, the theme.
Rheme becomes theme, then the next rheme becomes the next theme. It's totally interlocking.
This dense clustering creates incredibly tight texture. It is a very specific stylistic choice. It signals to the reader on a subconscious linguistic level that these semantic concepts, life, light, and darkness, are deeply, intrinsically interdependent.
You literally cannot understand John's concept of life without his concept of light. The lexicogrammar binds them together so tightly that to preach one without the other is to violate the texture of the gospel.
Exactly, but lexical cohesion isn't just exact repetition of the same word. There's also the second category, collocation.
Collocation. This is about words that probabilistically co-occur in what SFL calls expectancy sets.
Right. Collocation deals with words that belong to the same semantic environment. If I say smoke, you subconsciously expect the word fire.
The discourse analysis document points to 1 John 2.911 to illustrate this. John writes about someone who says he is in the light but hates his brother, saying he is actually in the darkness. But whoever loves his brother abides in the light.
So here we don't just have direct repetition, we have paired semantic antonyms.
Light and darkness.
Yeah.
Thus and Scotia, love and hatred. Agapach, pronounced aga, P-H-O, and mide, pronounced me-S-E-H-O. And they all revolve around this relational field of the adelphos, pronounced adel, F-O-S, the brother.
Notice that these words do not need strict grammatical coherence to cohere. They don't point to the exact same referent in the real world like a pronoun does.
They rely on the cultural expectancy network.
Exactly. In the world of the New Testament, and specifically in the socio-religious environment of John's community, light and dark, love and hate, and brother all belong to the same overarching conceptual frame. When you mention one, the others are immediately activated in the reader's mind.
John is using collocation to build a binary moral universe. There is absolutely no gray area in 1 John. You are in the light and you love your brother, or you are in the dark and you hate him. That's it.
For you as a preacher, recognizing these lexical fields is absolutely crucial.
You have to preach the overarching worldview of the text. If you get bogged down doing a 20-minute word study on the etymology of agapach in classical Greek literature from 400 years prior, you're entirely missing the point.
Yes.
The meaning of agapach in this text is defined by its collocation with phos, which is light, and its stark contrast with mise, hate, and scotia, darkness. Preach the binary moral universe the lexical chain creates, not a dictionary definition.
Understanding vocabulary and lexical fields is essential for getting the worldview right. But how those lexical chains are logically linked together can literally be the difference between heresy and orthodoxy.
Oh, this is the big one.
That brings us to conjunctive cohesion, which is where the exegetical stakes get as high as they can possibly get.
Conjunctions, the little words that connect the big ideas. And, but, therefore, because, in order that, traditional grammar usually just gives us a list of these and calls them connectors.
But SFL takes a totally different approach.
In systemic functional linguistics, conjunctions are different from reference items. They don't point backward to a specific noun to be filled in. You don't have to look for the referent of the word because.
Instead, conjunctions specify logical relationships between whole clauses or passages of text. And Halliday and Hasan make a critical distinction that every biblical scholar, every pastor, needs to master.
The fundamental difference between external and internal conjunctions. I have to admit, I always struggled with conjunctions until I understood this specific SFL framework. The traditional grammars just felt so flat.
It changes everything.
So break this down for us. External versus internal. What is the difference and how does it map onto Koine Greek?
It fundamentally changes how we view causality in a text. External conjunctions link phenomena in the extralinguistic real world. They connect physical events, physical causes, or temporal sequences in a narrative timeline.
Okay.
Internal conjunctions, on the other hand, link stages in the communication process or the rhetorical argument itself. They operate at the interpersonal level between the author and the reader, not the narrative level of the characters.
Give us an example of an external conjunction in the Greek text to set the baseline.
Look at John 2.1 lay 2, the narrative of the wedding at Cana. On the third day, there was a wedding in Cana in Galilee, and Jesus also was invited.
Okay, the Greek words kai, pronounced kai, meaning and de, pronounced de, meaning but, or now.
Right. Those function purely externally here. They're simply connecting real-world events in a temporal sequence. Event A happened in the real world, and then event B happened in the real world. It's the external narrative timeline. Jesus went to Cana, and there was a wedding. Very straightforward.
Simple enough. Narrative sequence. But let's look at an internal conjunction, because this is where a pastor can get into massive trouble.
Huge trouble.
The discourse analysis document brings up a 1 John 3.14. We know that we have passed out of death into life because we love the brothers.
No.
The Greek word for because there is hoti, pronounced H-O-H-T.
Let's read the full Greek clause so we can hear the structure. Hames oidamen, hodi metabe bakamen, ek tutentana tu astun zunin, hoti agapimen tu sadelphos.
Stop right there. I have to share a personal pastoral failure here, because if you don't grasp this, you will make the exact same mistake I made.
Let's hear it.
Years ago, I was preaching through 1 John. I got to this verse, and I treated that second hoti, that because, as an external causality. I treated it just like the sequence at Cana. And if it's external, the text is saying, the real-world action of loving people actually causes the real-world event of passing from death to life. Loving people makes you saved.
You accidentally preached works-based salvation?
I accidentally preached works-based salvation. I contradicted the entire New Testament theology of grace. because I misidentified a conjunction.
And this is exactly why SFL is not just an academic exercise for an ivory tower. It literally rescues the theology of the text. Halliday's framework shows us precisely why your early sermon was wrong.
Thank goodness.
The second hoti in 1 John 3.14 is not an external conjunction. It is an internal conjunction.
Explain the mechanism of how that works. How does it save the theology?
It does not express external causality in the real world. Loving people does not cause salvation. Instead, the conjunction links steps in the author's internal, interpersonal argument with the reader.
It's a rhetorical link.
Yes. It is an evidential, epistemological link, not an ontological cause. The semantic sense is this. We know proposition A, that we have passed from death to life. And my ground, or my evidence, for asserting this to you is proposition B, because we love the brothers.
Ah, the light bulb goes on. So loving the brothers is the evidence by which we know we are saved, not the cause of the salvation itself. It's an argument about epistemology, how we know what we know.
Exactly. The hoti links the logical stages of John's argument, not the actual events of justification. If a pastor doesn't understand the difference between SFL internal and external conjunctions, they are going to stand in the pulpit, scare at the word because, and accidentally preach full-blown Pelagianism from 1 John 3.14.
Mapping the internal logic systems of the text is the guardrail that keeps your theology orthodox.
It's the only way to be safe.
That is a massive, incredibly practical payoff for doing the hard work of discourse analysis. To truly master the text, we have to look at the macro level. We have to see how all these things, the internal logic systems, the lexical chains, the sentence structures, how they all align.
Which brings us to our final section, theme, rheme, and macrostructure. Putting it all together into what SFL calls total texture.
Total texture.
Total texture requires viewing cohesion in tandem with clause-level choices and the overall genre of the text. We've looked at intersentence cohesion, how sentences stick together through pronouns and conjunctions. Now we need to look at intersentence structure, how the single clause itself is organized as a message.
We touched on this earlier, but Halliday divides the clause into two parts.
Right. The theme, which is the psychological point of departure for the message, and the rheme, which is the remainder of the message, the new information being presented.
And the Greek New Testament uses thematic fronting all the time to manipulate this psychological point of departure. The discourse analysis document looks at what is arguably the most famous, heavily debated verse in the Greek language, John 1.1.
Let's hear it.
En arche on ho logos, kai ho logos en pros ton theon, kai theos on ho logos. In the beginning was the Word, and the Word was with God, and God was the Word.
Let's focus our exegesis on that third final clause. Kai theos on ho logos.
Okay.
In standard unmarked Greek syntax, the subject usually precedes the verb. If John wanted to write a standard sentence, he would have written kai ho logos on theos.
Right.
But here, John takes the predicate nominative, theos pronounced the os, God, and fronts it to the absolute theme position, placing it before the copulative verb anhana, pronounced aaa. The subject, ha logos, is pushed to the back to form the rheme.
Why does he do that? Because it's not just a random stylistic flair. By fronting theos, he connects the divine attribute directly to the preceding rheme in clause 2 pros ton theon, pronounced pros ton theon, with God.
Yes.
He creates an immediate locked-in lexical chain, while simultaneously highlighting the divine nature as the absolute primary thematic focus of the climax of the verse.
The syntactic structure itself screams, focus on the deity. If you miss the thematic fronting, you miss the explosive theological emphasis John intended.
And we have to recognize that this isn't just an isolated grammatical trick used in one verse. If we step all the way back and look at the macro structure, the genre of 1 John, this thematic fronting works alongside a very specific homiletic style.
1 John is not a linear, step-by-step logical argument like Paul gives us in Romans. Paul builds a legal case. John writes a cyclic, looping epistolary genre.
It's a spiral. I always tell my students to picture a slinky. He keeps circling back to the exact same themes over and over: light, love, truth, antichrist. But he drops deeper down the spiral each time he hits them.
Exactly. And the texture reflects that macrostructure perfectly. You have dense clusters of tight lexical reiteration when he's establishing those core doctrines. He uses heavy repetition to drive the point home.
But then he alternates with loose texture when he shifts into general pastoral exhortations, giving the reader a breather.
This creates a distinct, deliberate, periodic rhythm across the entire letter. The total texture, the imaginary cohesive hooks, the thematic fronting, the cyclical spiral genre, they don't exist in isolation. They all work together simultaneously to create a living artifact of meaning.
Which brings us to the end of our deep dive. We've gone on quite a linguistic and theological journey today. We started by acknowledging the visceral frustration of staring at a heavily parsed, dissected text that just feels dead on your desk.
A Saturday night panic.
We've moved from looking at Koine Greek as a dead specimen pinned to a parsing board to seeing it as a living, breathing artifact of meaning through the lens of systemic functional linguistics.
We've seen how imaginary texture pulls the reader in by creating insider solidarity.
We've seen how ellipsis shines a blinding spotlight on the theology of humility.
We've seen how lexical chains build binary moral worldviews.
And how internal conjunctions literally save us from preaching heresy.
The overarching lesson is this. The architecture of the language is just as inspired as the vocabulary itself. The way the words are connected matters just as much as what the words mean in a dictionary.
So here's the final call to action for you, the listener. The next time you sit down in your study to prep a sermon, I want you to try something different. Put the highlighters down for a minute. Stop trying to find the secret meaning of the text in the root of an aorist verb.
Don't just parse.
Trace the cohesive ties. Find the ellipses. Look for what the author deliberately left out. Map the internal conjunctions to ensure you understand the epistemology of the argument.
Look for the contrapuntal rhythm between the dense texture and the visual paragraphs.
Don't just preach the definitions of words. Preach the brilliant architecture of the text.
We've talked a lot today about the texture of the biblical text, but I want to leave you with this final, perhaps slightly provocative thought to ponder this week. What is the texture of your own sermons?
Oh, that's a great question.
When you stand in the pulpit to preach, are you giving your congregation tight thematic clusters they can actually hold on to? Are you deliberately using cohesive ties to guide them through your argument so they don't get lost?
Or are you just giving them a loose, disconnected string of grammatical facts and exegetical trivia, expecting them to build the cathedral themselves?
Let the architecture of the Greek text teach you not just what to preach, but how to preach it.
Remember that X-ray machine we talked about at the beginning? Stop trying to diagnose the text by just looking at the bones. Put the X-ray away, look at the living patient, and listen to the heartbeat of the language. Thanks for joining us on this deep dive.